always watching out for you. This is KOAA News 5 Special Edition.
From Trinidad to Colorado Springs, Westcliff to Lamar.
Southern Colorado is diverse, and decisions made by elected officials and voters impact all our lives.
This election, we're watching out for you, breaking down Colorado's mail-in voting process.
We're going to find a way to get something done.
Plus, the state of our state, how Colorado's political landscape looks this presidential election year.
Now it looks like it's at least something of a competitive race.
And giving you the facts so you make informed decisions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for this special edition of News 5 at 6:30.
Yeah, we're 5 weeks away to the day from Election Day, and in about a half hour, we're going to hear from President Trump, former Vice President Joe Biden on the debate stage in Cleveland.
2020 is a year unlike any other, and this election season is no exception, which is why we want to do our part here at News 5, making sure you have all the information this year to make the best decision for you before you receive your ballot.
So let's talk about a breakdown of what's on the ballot this November. Of course, aside from the presidential race, Coloradans, of course, will be deciding the U.S. Senate race between one of the two Senate seats.
Right. Current Republican Senator Cory Gardner or former Governor John Hickenlooper on the Democratic ticket. We'll break down this race in just a little bit.
Also, some of the other races, who will represent us from the 3rd Congressional District in the House, also the 5th Congressional District as well. Also, some of the elected offices at the state and county level, as well as the district attorney's office.
And this year we'll decide on 11 statewide ballot questions. Several other local communities also have questions on the ballot. We'll be taking a look at some of these issues tonight. But if you'd like a look at some of the resources available to you ahead of the election, head to KOAA.com, click Election 2020. We have a breakdown of some of the big ballot questions, a list of resources when it comes to voting, and fact checks from political ads.
Now, here's what to watch. Colorado, one of 33 states with a U.S. Senate election this November, and depending on who wins it, it could impact which party controls the Senate. Of course, incumbent Cory Gardner is hoping to serve a second term in the Senate as he takes on former Governor John Hickenlooper, who joined the race after ending his bid for the Democratic presidential nominee. Recent polls have shown the former governor leading by an average of 7%, with a margin of error of plus or minus 3%. Gardner and Hickenlooper will participate in a debate moderated by our partners at Denver 7. That's on October 9th. That's 1 week from Friday, and you can see it right here on News 5.
And Pueblo makes up a small part of a Congressional District 3 land-wise, but it makes up a good portion of the population.
Yeah, and this year the race for the seat in the U.S. House is historic. Republican Lauren Boebert and Democrat Diane Mitch Bush are hoping to represent Colorado in Congress, but as News 5's Ashley Portillo explains, there's additional significance with this race.
All eyes are on the congressional race for District 3 because for the first time ever, 2 women are facing one another in that election. So no matter what the outcome is, this district will be represented by a woman.
Right now it looks like it's at least something of a competitive race.
A competitive race between 2 women for the first time ever. University of Colorado, Colorado Springs Professor Josh Dunn weighs in on the upcoming congressional election for District 3.
So it kind of fits with these larger national trends where you just see increased female representation in Congress.
Dunn says up until about 1980, about 3% of the seats in the House of Representatives were filled by women. Fast forward to a couple years ago, and those numbers jumped up to about 25%. And that growing trend of women in politics is seen here locally as Republican nominee Lauren Boebert faces Democratic opponent Diane Mitch Bush. Boebert knocked incumbent Republican Scott Tipton out of his seat this summer.
And the fact that Tipton is not on the ballot is huge. Republicans lost an incumbent who was pretty well liked in the district. And so that puts a lot of things up for grabs.
And Dunn says it's going to be a close one because traditionally, District 3 as a whole has leaned Republican. The district covers a large part of the state from southeast Colorado to the northwest. It includes Pueblo, which has majority Democratic voters. And the votes in Pueblo could be a deciding factor in this historical election.
But Pueblo is the largest population center in the district.
Dunn says right now it's still a little bit too early to tell which way Pueblo will be voting, but right now it is looking like they are leaning more Democratic. Always watching out for you, Pueblo. Ashley Portillo, News 5.
And Pueblo has received national attention this year from major outlets calling it a place to watch this November. And just this past weekend, MSNBC paid a visit to the Steel City during the Chili Fest to catch up with voters.
This election ballot is packed with questions from property tax revenue to property tax revenue law to reintroducing wolves in Colorado. There are a lot of issues you'll be asked about in addition to who you'd like to hold office. We'll be breaking them down throughout the night for you as well. Of the 11 statewide ballot initiatives, one getting a lot of attention is asking if the state should create a $1.3 billion paid family leave program. Here's the proposal. Employees would be eligible for the program after working for their employer for 180 days. They would be entitled to 90% of their pay, but no more than $1,100 a week. Employees and employers would pay half, costing 0.9% of an employee's wage. Supporters say now more than ever the state needs to offer this benefit to workers.
Seeing how people's lives have been affected when they were not allowed to take a pause in order to care for the people they love.
Now, opponents argue it's an added cost businesses can't afford to take on, and it would drive business away.
And we're very concerned that it creates this massive, expensive program that's not going to be able to deliver on what it promises.
Now, previous attempts at the state legislature to create a pay leave program have failed, which is why a group petitioned to get it on the ballot come November.
Perhaps one of the biggest stories this year is what elections will look like in the age of COVID-19. And many states have looked to Colorado as an example. If you voted in our state before, you know every registered voter receives a ballot in the mail. And it is a system that's receiving that national recognition. And we bring in News5's Allison Zimmerman now with a look at how it all works. Allison.
Elizabeth, Colorado has been called the safest state to cast a vote, and part of it goes back to a change made nearly a decade ago when the state started sending ballots to every registered voter.
It's a familiar sound come election night in Colorado, ballots getting processed. And while Colorado's election system is no stranger to the national spotlight, this year it's received even more attention.
Come vote.
Here's some background. Decades ago, Coloradans were allowed to request an absentee ballot without an excuse. In 2008, you could become a permanent mail-in voter. Then in 2013, the state began voting by mail statewide. And since then,
our system is by far and away the best system nationwide.
People on both sides of the aisle have touted the state's mail-in system.
Colorado has a number of protections that make our voting system safe and secure.
And as former Secretary of State Wayne Williams will tell you, several steps have been taken to make the state one of the safest to cast a vote.
That's not the case in some other states.
Some of those steps include a database of voter signatures. This way, signatures on ballots can be verified. Pueblo County Clerk Bo Ortiz explained the process during a tour of the election facility this summer.
I mean, that's like a fingerprint almost. We're really working hard on that to make sure that the integrity of elections is staying at that top level, you know, and looking for even ways to make it better.
Williams says signature verification discrepancy is something that even happened to his daughter while he was Secretary of State.
She then took the steps necessary to correct her signature so the ballot was able to be counted.
If the signature doesn't match, voters get a letter and an opportunity to cure the ballot. Additionally, the state cross-references databases with various agencies to ensure people who are not eligible to vote, such as people who have passed away, don't get a vote. Colorado also does what's known as a risk-limiting audit after each election, which gives statistical evidence to show the outcome of an election is correct. Colorado also allows the option to vote in person, and with COVID-19, additional protocols when it comes to physical distancing and sanitizing are also in place.
We want to make sure that no Colorado voter ever has to choose between voting and their health.
That's Secretary of State Jenna Griswold in May, as thousands of Coloradans prepared to cast their ballots in the June primary. Much like the primary, this November, election workers will be in mass and have temperatures taken. Clerks have also been reminding voters over the last several months if they plan to vote in person, it may take some additional time.
So people are going to have to be patient because we can only allow so many people in some of these buildings.
Changes with the times during a time when few things seem consistent. But for most voters in Colorado, things will look relatively familiar.
And we've seen a lot of different discussions over the past few months when it comes to mail-in voting, or as you know, this universal access as far as having the vote by mail in many states, no excuse absentee ballots, what that all looks like. And there have been concerns as far as voter access and also supply chain in printing the ballots. But we've been following along as different states have actually looked at changing their laws. Some states have even made COVID-19 as an excuse for their absentee ballots if they don't have that no excuse absentee voting as well. And we've also seen some of these decisions, of course, still play out in their respective state courts as well. Robin Elizabeth.
Allison, thanks. So the question is, how does Colorado stack up when it comes to other states in this situation? We are one of 5 in the country with all the mail-in voting. A majority of states have no excuse absentee voting. So where you can get an absentee ballot just by requesting it. One thing we're closely watching, though, this November is how long it will take to process ballots. So take a look. Now, these states right now accept ballots with a postmark of Election Day. Colorado does not. If you're mailing your ballot, you're asked to do so at least a week before Election Day. Ballots need to be in the hands of the county clerk by 7 p.m. on Election Day. Now, take a look at these states. They don't begin counting or processing ballots until Election Day, which could play a key role with states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, some of those swing states, on how soon we may know the results of the election nationally. And as always, we want to remind you about our voter resources available on our website, from how to register to those key deadlines. Again, it's all at KOAA.com.
And we are going to win Colorado in a landslide.
Still ahead on this special edition of News 5, we're taking a look at the state's political landscape, as many are saying it is trending away as a battleground state.
Plus, how campaigning looks differently in the era of COVID-19.
And the question on your ballot this year, splitting bipartisan groups in the state and what it could mean for property taxes. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for this election special ahead of tonight's presidential debate. And it is sure to be a big event in Ohio as both President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden look to make their case to voters. Our John Kosick in Cleveland with a preview of what we can expect.
The stage is set here in Cleveland as the city gets ready to play host to the first presidential debate of the 2020 election season. The Cleveland Clinic landing as host of the debate 2 months ago after the University of Notre Dame backed out because of the pandemic. Roads around the site are blocked off with a pretty wide security perimeter on the campus. This will be Joe Biden's first debate since March, Donald Trump's first since 2016. This is the first presidential debate Cleveland has hosted since 1980, and the classic showdown between President Jimmy Carter and challenger Ronald Reagan is drawing comparisons to this one because that was the only debate of that election between the two. And because of the pace of early voting this year, this will be the only debate that many voters will likely see before casting their ballots, especially when you consider the next time these two will meet face-to-face will be 16 days from now. The Cleveland Clinic have been working with the debate commission before being named host on safety protocols. There will be no handshakes tonight, no traditional audience. Both candidates will wear masks on their way to the podium, and essentially everyone in the building will have been tested. And being on a hospital campus, both sides will likely take a Hippocratic oath of their own for their campaigns. Do no harm. In Cleveland, John Kosick.
And thanks for joining us ahead of the debate. A question on the ballot this November wants to know what to do with the state's electoral college votes. In 2019, state lawmakers voted to join the National Popular Vote Compact, which would apply the state's electoral votes to whichever candidate wins the national popular vote in a presidential election. A couple of elected officials, including Monument Mayor Don Wilson, petitioned for a referendum on the ballot to take this to voters, and the compact would not go into effect until enough states totaling 270 votes to win the election agreed to join.
Well, Colorado is used to getting attention for being a battleground state during big elections, considered purple for the last couple of cycles, but this year, not all lists include Colorado. In fact, there are no scheduled visits at this time from either President Trump or Joe Biden.
Although, as we've reported, it's not stopping us from receiving this national attention. News5's Allison Zimmerman joining us again with a look at our state's political landscape. Allison.
Robin Elizabeth, in 2018, people called Colorado a blue avalanche, with Democrats taking all major state offices and regaining control of the state legislature. But what does this all mean on the national stage?
Colorado has been known for years as a purple state, with a fairly recent divided control in the state legislature and a mix of Republicans and Democrats in state office.
Of the Rocky Mountains with thousands of terrific, hardworking, great American patriots.
But this presidential election year, Colorado found itself off of some list as a battleground state, instead finding itself as leaning or likely Democrat. In Washington, Colorado is represented by a Democrat and a Republican in the U.S. Senate. But Cory Gardner faces what's considered to be a tough race against former Governor John Hickenlooper this November, which could flip the seat and help Democrats nationally gain control of the Senate.
Coloradans are very in tune and smart.
Taking a look at the 7 congressional districts in the state, a majority are represented by Democrats. Congressional District 6 flipped in 2018, which is part of the reason Colorado is losing its standing as a swing state. One part of the state that is receiving national attention is Pueblo County, with a mix of Democratic and Republican voters. In 2016, President Trump won by a small margin. And a couple of years later, Governor Jared Polis won over voters, making it a place political analysts are watching closely.
We're going to find a way to get something done.
It's also been a place looked at closely at the state capitol, with Puebloans holding major offices such as Senate President and Chair of the Joint Budget Committee.
I have a job to do to represent my community, but I'm also not opposed to working with anyone who wants to get the job done.
Senate President Leroy Garcia says he balances the political divide between urban and rural in his own district by compromising across party lines. It's not to say that there aren't Republicans in Colorado. There are counties in the state that tend to be red every election.
And we are going to win Colorado in a landslide.
One of the more populated counties, here in El Paso County, typically known as a Republican stronghold in the state, has been predominantly represented by Republicans in Congress and at the state and local level. It also played a role in President Trump's visit earlier this year with a rally at Broadmoor World Arena.
And I'm thrilled to be back in Colorado Springs. I've spent a lot of time here over the years.
There are a couple of factors that can play a role in the state's political landscape. For one, more people are moving here, and next year redistricting could also play a role in how districts are drawn, ultimately impacting who could represent Colorado in Congress. And depending on how the state votes this November, that'll give us a big indicator on where the state tends to rank nationally and what this means moving forward. Always watching out for you, Southern Colorado. Allison Zimmerman, News 5.
Allison, thanks for that insight. And as everything has changed during the pandemic, how candidates are reaching potential voters, no exception. Most town halls, campaign events have been held virtually or with very few people.
Knocking on doors is one of the most effective ways to just get people out to vote for you. It does make it much more difficult. I think probably what they're relying on to an even greater extent would be targeted campaign ads using social media.
The economic impact also playing a role in fundraising this year. Some candidates say donors who typically give more are having to scale back.
Much more to cover in the special edition of News 5 tonight. After the break, a look at some of the questions on your ballot getting a lot of attention.
As the state's political landscape appears to be changing, 2 bipartisan groups are at odds over an amendment in the state's constitution. One question this November is asking if the state should repeal the Gallagher Amendment, which splits the state's property tax base. Homeowners currently making up 45%, commercial property making up 55%. Some say it's needed to fund critical services. Others say this isn't the solution.
Gallagher's 40 years old, and like a house with 40-year-old plumbing, it doesn't matter how pretty the house is. When the plumbing's 40 years old, it doesn't work that well anymore.
Regional approach and talk about setting assessment rates in different ways, given that housing value doesn't go up the exact same way.
By the way, we have a full breakdown of the amendment question that's on our website at KOAA.com.
Another contentious issue on the ballot wants voters to decide if gray wolves should be reintroduced to Colorado. Supporters of the initiative say wolves play an important part in the health of our ecosystem. Opponents say gray wolves from neighboring states have already been observed in our state, and adding them could potentially hurt livestock.
Another controversial issue on the ballot about abortion rights in Colorado. One group wants to ban abortions after 22 weeks unless a doctor feels a woman's life is in danger. Colorado, one of 7 states without some sort of abortion ban. Part of the reason supporters say this should be on the books. Opponents say it doesn't give enough exemptions. Still ahead with the first presidential debate just minutes away now in the heart of the Rust Belt. We're going to tell you where the candidates stand on plans to help the auto industry when we come back.
Presidential debate happening in Cleveland, one of America's historic car manufacturing hubs.
The auto industry and jobs expected to be a big issue, so where do the candidates stand? Well, Joe Biden has said he wants to shift 300,000 government cars from gas to electric, believing government investment would generate 1 million new jobs. President Trump says his new USMCA trade deal will create 100,000 jobs, says a rollback of environmental regulations will result in cheaper cars.
A reminder before we head off to the debate tonight, some key deadlines for this election. Ballots will be mailed out next Friday, October 9th. You're asked to mail your ballot back well before Election Day to make sure it's received in time. If not, you can drop it off at one of the hundreds of boxes throughout the state by 7 on Election Day. Enjoy the first presidential debate. We'll see you at 10.